You're listening to the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson, episode 57. Hey there, you're listening to the Business and Life Conversations podcast. My name is Angela Henderson, and on this show, we talk about improving your business, life, or both by having amazing and rich conversations with brilliant guests who will inspire you and who will give you tips and tricks to help you grow both in life and in business. Well, hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Business and Life Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Angela, from Angela Henderson Consulting, where I'm a business consultant helping women in business to develop the foundational framework they need to grow sustainable and profitable businesses. And I do that by helping women gain clarity, strategy, and also having access to a beautiful community. I hope you're ready to be mind-blowing with this episode, just as I was when I first heard about the export grant, because it could potentially change your entire business. I don't say that lightly, so please let me explain. In this episode, I'm going to be bringing on an amazing man by the name of Erik Anderson from Grant Central, who I am privileged to be able to call a friend of mine. He is going to talk to you about the export grant. Now, before you shut this episode off because you think this episode doesn't apply to your business, I want to make it very, very, very clear that this is an episode you will want to listen to. I too thought I didn't qualify for the export grant because I'm currently a service-based business only with Angela Henderson Consulting, and Erik advised that I was wrong and that I clearly am eligible to apply for this particular mind-blowing grant that is not spoken about enough here in Australia. So for those of you out there that are Australian business owners, I just want you to know that the Export Grant is an assistance program administered by Austrade and is available to help both e-commerce and service-based businesses promote their products overseas. And during this episode, you're going to learn what is the Export Grant, what are the eligibility criteria, how you can apply for this grant, and how many times you can apply for it, and so much more valuable information. I'm telling you, you will want to listen because, as I mentioned earlier, it could potentially change your entire business. So for that, in my time of even knowing about the export grant, I've probably referred to Erik 10 other businesses who were servicing people in America, servicing people over in the UK, spending tens of thousands of dollars to now understand that they too can apply for the export grant and get copious amounts of money back. So please stay tuned for this amazing episode. But before we jump into this episode, I just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by my 4-day, 3-night exclusive Women in Business retreat, where we will be focusing on women having the chance to connect, refocus, learn, and grow. This event is going to be held from October 24th through to October 27th at the Gold Coast here in sunny Queensland, Australia. And it's an exclusive event with only 50 tickets being sold in order to ensure it is intimate and businesses get exactly what they need for growth. From having 8 of Australia's top female entrepreneurs speaking to surrounding yourself with amazing people that will lift you both up at the conference and after conference, to daily masterminds to get individual help on your businesses from both your peers and the speakers, to amazing food, being able to sleep in and eat a meal uninterrupted by your children, you're not going to want to miss this amazing retreat. To learn more about this retreat and to purchase your ticket today, head to angelahenderson.com.au and simply click on retreat. All right, let's get into this epic episode. Welcome to the show, Erik.
Thank you very much, Angela, for having me.
Gosh, well, thank you so much for being on board. I know you're a busy man in the middle of this current, crazy financial year ending type season. So thank you for having the time to come on board today to talk about the good old export grant.
No problem. Looking forward to sharing it with your listeners.
Yes. And then listen, I was trying to think back as I do with all my guests when we first met. And I know we briefly had an encounter at ProBlogger. It was like in passing, doing like, hi, how are you? And that was it. But we didn't actually really, because ProBlogger is an amazing event. And actually Darren Rouse is bringing that back to Melbourne this year. End of August, I believe. I saw tickets are about to go on sale. So for those of you wanting a really great event in Australia, that is a great event to attend to. And it's going to be almost 2 years since we initially met. And then our paths, it's funny, we just continue to cross paths on a regular basis at other events that we attended. And then we happen to be in James Shremko's membership together.
That's right.
And whenever we get together, we always have a good belly laugh. We always have good conversation. Yeah. So I knew I had to get you on the podcast to have a chat because, there's so much information you have about something so many Australians in particular, because that's where we're at, don't know about. And again, what I think people are missing out on is an enormous amount of potential injection of cash flow back into their business because of this amazing thing called the Market Development Grant. So yes, that's why we have you here. But Erik, I'm going to throw a spanner in the works. I know we kind of talked about what questions we're going to have, but before we dig into the nitty-gritty about export grants, I always like to ask my guests a question that I don't let you guys know about because I think it's important that the listeners get to know you a little bit about who you are. And I know through our relationship over the last couple of years, there's one thing that I've really honed in on, and you love hotels, but not just any hotel, Erik.
Yeah, when I travel, I like to spend a bit of money on some decent hotels. So it's not the most expensive hotels, but I do like to go and spend a little bit more money on the not the most expensive, but reasonably well looked after hotels, because when you travel and you've got meetings, there's nothing that beats a good night's rest.
A good night's rest, but also just to make life easier. Like if you're jet lagged and you're in between schedules, like you want good internet, you want to be able to access food. Everything needs to kind of be, especially if you're on, like I know people who will literally touch down in the US or Canada, they're there for 72 hours and leave. Like you want things at your fingertips. So my question to you is you've done a lot of travel in your time. What is your most favorite hotel? That's my question for you, and why?
I suppose the hotel that I go and spend the most time in when I'm in Sydney is the Western Hotel, right in the middle of Sydney. I just love the hotel. It's so close to all the transport options, good restaurants. Most of our clients are in the CBD, so it's easy to walk to their offices. And it's a great hotel with so much history and good food, and just love it.
The Westin in downtown Sydney is your go-to.
Yes.
All right, then. That's good. So any of you heading to Sydney, listen to Erik's advice. Now, that's great. We know about the hotels. But tell those listeners, because I'm still new to the whole podcasting. Well, actually, we're about to hit our year episode, which is kind of exciting. By the time this goes live, we will have already hit our year. So I'll batch my episodes ahead of time. So we will have had a year show going in advance, which is amazing. So not all my listeners will be very familiar with my guests. So I also just want you to give us a brief little background about who you are, Erik, and what you currently do. And then we'll hop into this particular episode.
Yeah. I've been in Australia for 17 years, was born in South Africa to Swedish parents. So I can talk Swedish and English and a couple of other languages that I've learned over the years.
Well, that's fun. I didn't know that. That's a cool fact to know.
And so I'm an accountant by training. And when I came to Australia, started looking for accounting jobs, met a person who was doing government grants, and did some contract work with him, started doing that. Just enjoyed meeting people from a whole range of industries, and enjoyed the fact that I could do work and then they could get money from the government. As an accountant, when you're dealing with clients, typically you're helping them pay the tax man and things like this, where this was the other way around, where I was helping clients get money. And so I've been doing this for the last 17 years and really enjoy working with a whole range of different clients across many industries and just getting to know a little bit more about what they do.
No, fantastic. And listen, you're a conversation starter. I see it at so many events that we attend together. And that's what I love about you, is you're always really interested about what other people are doing. And also that's, I guess, where your expertise comes in, because I know initially you said when we first met, you're like, oh, Ange, have you ever heard about this like expert market development grant? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I never qualify for anything. And you're like, do you service people out of Australia, or do you advertise out of Australia? And I was like, yeah. And you're like, we need to talk. And I was like, hold on a minute. Why is this like shit top secret? I was like, this should not be top secret. And so yes, you're about to help me with my own export grant at the end of this financial year, which is super exciting. But for those of you listening and you're kind of like, all right, you two, stop with like, this top secret stuff. Let us in on it. Tell us what the export I call it the export grant, but the real name or the definition name, I think, is called the Export Market Development Grant. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the export grant, just to give it its shorter title, has been around for over 44 years in Australia. It was initially put together by the federal government to assist Australian-based businesses with the high expenses of trying to get their products over into the rest of the world. The costs, you can imagine, in the 70s and 80s of going to a trade show, just telling people about the products, and that was very expensive. And the government put together this program to assist Australian companies to subsidize some of their marketing costs in going overseas. Over the years, it's changed quite a bit. One of the most recent changes that's been around for just under 10 years is the ability for Australian-based companies to have their products, Australian-developed products, manufactured offshore, typically in China, and for it still to be considered an export, eligible for the export grant.
Gosh, amazing. And so, Erik, why do you think so many businesses, like I consider myself pretty cluey. I go to an enormous amount of events here in Australia and international. And like, again, I was dumbfounded when you told me about this grant. Why do you think it's something that there's not a lot of attention and a lot of, hype about? Because I think so many business owners who kind of struggle with that cash injection, especially when you're starting out and you want to break into the international market. Why do you think it's not spoken about as often?
Well, I think, it is publicized. I think a lot of people in the digital marketing space, like yourself and others that, we've worked with, don't consider themselves to be exporters. But yes, any business that gets foreign money into their bank account, i.e., from America, UK, China, anything, anywhere, except for New Zealand. New Zealand isn't counted as an export country, but the rest of the world, anybody who you invoice and receive money into Australia is an exporter. And that's where this Export Market Development Grant is there to assist you with promoting your products and services overseas to get more money into Australia for foreign exchange. That's the purpose behind it.
I'm sure for those of you that are like falling off your chairs, not really just give you a minute to pick yourself up, because you're probably thinking there like I was, like, this is too good to be true. This is like some kind of scam, this isn't. But like Erik said, this has been in Australia for 44 years. Erik has done hundreds, thousands of these applications over your time.
It could be coming to 1,000, close. We should hit 1,000 applications in the next couple of years.
And you have, recovered's not the right word, but you've been able to bring back to small businesses, medium-sized businesses, an enormous amount of money that people just weren't even expecting. So yes, now that people, I guess, know about this grant, is it a grant, or can you talk us a little bit more? Like, do you need to spend the money first before you can apply for the grant, or do they give you the grant and then you get to spend the money? Like, how does it work?
So there are two different types of grants that we look at. One is called reimbursive. So you spend the money first and then you get some of it back. And that's really the export grant and another program called the R&D tax incentive. Those are the two categories of grants that fall into that category of reimbursive. Spend money first and then you get some of it back if you meet the criteria. The other type of grant is called a competitive grant. So this is a grant where you'll put in an application, it will go to a committee will look at all the applications and depending on how much money is in the budget, will then allocate the money to deserving applicants. We look at those grants as well, but the purposes of this discussion, we look at the Export Market Development Grant, which is a reimbursive grant.
Reimbursing grant. And for those that are kind of wondering, going, okay, well, and she's a digital marketer versus like, say, an e-commerce product-based business, what are some of the main areas is that like what could people claim potentially? Like, yeah, I know every individual business is going to be very different, and that's why it will be important for them to talk to you specifically, but kind of just like for conversation purposes, what are some of the main areas that businesses could claim in?
Yeah, so most businesses are able to claim a lot of the same type of expenditure. It varies from industry to industry and business to business, but typically we'll just run through it. So the major area that people claim under is what's called overseas marketing trips. Uh-huh. This is where you go to, let's say, in your example, you might go to social media marketing world to go and find new clients to take your products. The cost of flying over to the US, the cost of the attending social media marketing world, as an example. And then for meals, accommodation, and taxis and Uber, you get a daily allowance of $350 a day per day that you spend marketing. Now, how it works is that you would then add up all those expenses. So that might come to $15,000. $15,000, you take off $5,000, which gives you $10,000, and you get 50 cents on the dollar back. So you would get then back $5,000.
Yep.
The other expenses, which now add to that $15,000 that I was talking about, and one which has changed the export grant totally over the last couple of years, is you can claim the cost of advertising via Facebook, Google, Instagram, LinkedIn, all those marketing spend that's directed to clients, customers outside of Australia and New Zealand. So, for example, if you're doing a Facebook campaign and you're targeting only the US, you'd be able to claim the 100% of those expenses. If you were doing a global advertising campaign, which would mix in Australia and New Zealand, that gets a bit more complicated. In that case, we then have to go and have a look at the hits on your website and work out a percentage of Australia and New Zealand versus the rest of the world. I always say to clients, if you're going to do Facebook marketing, advertising, or Google, just geo-target the rest of the world, and makes it a whole
so much easier.
Then one of the other areas is if, for example, you have somebody based in the US to go and market your product and services, we can claim their expenses. If you are having a market research consultant to go and have a look at how big the market is, and we can claim their costs as well. I mentioned earlier on going to trade shows. So you might go to conferences, or you might go to a trade show, have a booth there. All the costs of putting the booth together, electricity, the cost of the stand, all those expenses that add up over time, all of those expenses can be claimed as well. If you're in the physical goods type of industry, the cost of sending samples over to a potential buyer can be claimed. In that case, what you look at is the manufactured cost of the product plus the transport or Australia Post costs of sending it over to somebody who's based outside of Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, and these are just like some of just many other options, do you know what I mean, that people potentially can claim for. Like, if you're making a course that's going to be sold not only to Australians, like an 8-week coaching program like I have, and you've got to bring consultants on, that potentially can also, do you know what I mean, be part of the export grant, correct? If they're overseas, is that right?
Yes, it does become a bit grey in that area, specific area that you mentioned, Angela. It's the export grant only covers the marketing side. So if you're getting people in to help you with the production of the course, that isn't considered to be marketing. So then we've got to exclude those. So It does get a bit technical, and that's obviously where, having done this for 17 years, I can look at an application and quickly work out which areas are eligible and which aren't.
Which aren't. Yeah, no, fantastic. So again, for those of you that are out there and you guys are going, well, I do some of that, I do some of that. Again, later on, we'll make sure that you know how to get a hold of Erik, because it is super important that you at least have conversations and ask questions to make sure to see if you're eligible or not, because again, many businesses aren't aware of this. Now, in regards to how much money does the Australian government actually put towards the export market grant? Do you know, Erik? Like, is it an enormous amount that they put into the government?
So the government has put in $135 million.
Wow.
Over the last couple of years, the budget hasn't been fully, it's been short underpaid. It's probably the best way. So the maximum grant you can get back is $150,000. You are up to, right as we speak now, you are guaranteed the first $40,000. And if your grant is over $40,000, based on how many applications there are and how much money is left in the kitty, you may get a percentage of the balance paid out to you. You may not get the full $150,000. The government has committed to put in an extra $20 million for the next 3 years to help ease the situation that they currently find themselves in.
But still, I mean, for a business just like mine, I was like, all right, man, I didn't even know I was going to be eligible for anything. So any money back, do you know what I mean, is going to help me out. Like, and that's what I guess I think people are like, oh, well, I might not get the full kit and caboodle. Man, don't be greedy here, people. Like, embrace the fact that the government has this, look into it, and see, because once you're educated around it, you're going to be able to make better informed decisions about your marketing and where you position yourself, you know, for the upcoming 5 months, 6 months, or even 12 months. So things to be thinking about. Or you may have been wanting to crack into the US market or a different market, but just didn't think you'd be eligible to be able to do that. Like, again, this is a wonderful opportunity. You're not going to get the money up front, but knowing that you're eventually going to be able to apply and get that back, I can only imagine would take the stress off of a variety of different businesses.
Oh, yes. And we've seen over the years that people have dipped their toes in and just said, oh, I'm not sure if this is real, get their first money back from the government. And then they realize, oh, this works. And then they put more and more money into their marketing spend because they know they're going to get half of it back.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's like why wouldn't you though, right? Like, again, I know that there's always risk, but it's kind of like you would be silly not to. Like obviously meet with your accountant, etc. I'm not an accountant, but what I'm saying is it's like, to me, common sense would prevail here. Now, for those that, I know the things with government grants, there can also be some time frames and limits around that. Can a business apply at any time during the year or only certain times during the year? Like, what do you recommend to businesses?
Yeah, so the program opens on the 1st of July, so it runs on the Australian financial year. So on the 1st of July this year, 2019, you can apply for any expenses that you incurred from 1 July 2018 to 30th of June 2019. If you are a first-time applicant, and this only applies to your first application, you can actually go back 2 years. So if you have never applied for the export grant previously, we can look at any expenses, overseas marketing expenses from the 1st of July 2017 to 30th of June 2018, plus 1st of July 2018 to the 30th of June 2019. Yeah. That's to help smaller businesses get over the threshold, because you have to have spent $15,000 in eligible overseas marketing expenditure to be able to claim a grant. So to help smaller businesses, they've allowed the fact that you can put 2 years together to get to that 15,000 if you need it.
And then let me ask you this, because I was just thinking about. So like, say you get that money back and it goes into your account. Do you have to then claim that as like, what am I trying to ask you? Do you have to claim that as
income?
Yes.
It is shown. It is income.
Is income. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay,
so
cool. Yeah,
it's there it helps. It's cash flow. It assists with your cash flow, but it is seen as income in the business account.
That makes sense. And from the time, so it's got to go in by the end of February. And then how long do businesses normally have to wait before they would hear if their application has been accepted, rejected, what the dollar amount will be that they're getting back? Like, how does that work?
So if you apply in July, August, September, October even, it probably takes 6 weeks for the process to be to work through and for you to get notified that you've been successful. There are times when Austrade may phone you up or go and visit your offices just to make sure that you're legitimate. So 6 weeks. If you wait until the very last minute, end of February, for clients who we lodged at the end of February, we are currently doing audits on those clients. So we're looking at 3, 4, possibly even 5 months for those people to get their money back. There's no reason why you don't look at us and lodge as early as possible to get the money back. To be able to
that too, again, to me is common sense. If you know there's free money sitting there, like, what are you waiting here, people, for? Like, you're gonna make this a priority, in my opinion.
Yeah, Angela, if there wasn't a deadline, there would be still some of our clients who wouldn't lodge. So
yeah, it's like just mind blowing to me, especially, again, obviously if they're quadrillionaires, maybe, but I'm just gonna as a small business owner where, you take less. Well, I do anyways. I can't speak for a lot of people. Some people have this assumption that, because I've done pretty well over the last couple of years, that people just think like I roll around in money. But the reality of it is when you're growing and scaling your business, my family takes very little. Do you know what I mean? As we pay each other, or we pay ourselves every single week, but you're trying to scale. So you're spending things to go overseas, and you're doing all these little things that just, they take money, right? Building your team. So yeah. And I know for us is that, you're going to work with me at the end or beginning of July, and we're going to go back those 2 years because we held off on doing it for that 1 year to accumulate the 2 years. So yes, I'm pumped, do you know what I mean, to get that underway. So I know you've spoken a little bit about it, but is there any kind of key eligibility criteria that people need to be considering when applying for the export grant?
Yes, so probably the main thing is that you have to have an ABN. That's really the only requirement. You can be a sole trader, you can be a trust, you can be a proprietary limited company. The only requirement is you have to have an ABN. And you have to have the capacity to export. So you can't just decide, okay, I'm going to go and do a trip over to the US and go on holiday and then claim it for the export grant. You have to be able to prove that you have a business that is able to export if needed. You don't have to have any sales in your first 2 applications. You just have to be able to prove to Australia that you have the capacity to be able to export.
Yeah, no, that sounds, again, quite reasonable expectation, to be able to justify getting, again, money back from the government. And I think you spoke about this just a second ago, and I want to make sure that I'm clear. The minimum, what is the minimal expenditure needed to claim the export grant? And does this need to be spent in a financial year, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you have to have spent at least $15,000 in eligible expenditure. And as I said, for a first-time applicant, that $15,000 can cover 2 years.
Okay,
It's the only time that this is allowed. Every year after you've done your first application, you have to spend at least $15,000 in that particular year to be able to apply.
Right, perfect. But that, again, makes sense. So $15,000 every year after, which I guess goes into my question if people are like, okay, you're talking about years after. Obviously, this isn't just a one-off export grant that I'm assuming people can apply for. So how many times could a business hypothetically, apply for the export grant?
Yes, so you are able to claim 8 times. The first application covers 2 years, can cover 2 years, and then you've got 7 more applications after that. You don't have to apply every year. So I do have some clients who will go and do the first application and then hold off for a year, because the second year they don't have to have any export. The second application, they don't have to have any export sales. So they might just be strategic in how they spend their marketing dollars in the next year to try and get as much back. From the third application, you do have to have export sales. And there is a bit of a complicated formula that comes in to make sure that you are increasing your export sales every year to take advantage of the export grant. And if anybody wants more information, I'm happy to give them a explanation or a handout on how that works. It is a bit more complicated, but for most people in those first 2 years or 3 years for the first 2 applications, it's something that you don't need to bother about.
Yeah, and I would say the majority of listeners of mine are fairly still in startups / have been in it for a couple of years. So I would say that most people are, like I said, a bit mind blown. Do you know what I mean? At the moment that this is even a possibility. So I would suspect that they're not even at the year 3 mark, I would say. No. So can you, I think you answered this, is that you can combine the first and second year when you apply the first time, but thereafter you just do that single year if necessary. Or like you said, you could miss a year if you needed to, but again, you can only apply a total of 8 times in the lifespan of that particular business.
Yes. Yeah. It does get a bit complicated. Australia is very aware that sometimes after people have had 8 years, they look at creative ways to stay in the program. Australia is aware of it. So, it's not something that you can just shut down company A and start company B the next day and expect to start from scratch again.
Goodness, okay. Well, there's always the dodgy ones. Yes. Always the dodgy ones, Eric. So then, are there any countries, and I think, again, you touched on this briefly, New Zealand, but other than that, are there any countries that you can't claim the grant for?
Yes. So if you are spending marketing dollars into North Korea, we can't claim those marketing dollars.
Okay.
So the only country that outside of New Zealand that is excluded is North Korea.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty simple.
I don't think you would have many clients who have business in North Korea.
I personally know, I personally don't know of any other business that I even work with that does, but I mean, you never know. There's always someone out there, but I couldn't see a huge percentage of people being in the North Korea. But anyways, you never know. There'll always be one out there going, I do, so don't want to, segregate those guys. And how would you recommend businesses maximize their claim for the export, grant? Because obviously, if you're going, okay, well, I could probably get 15,000 just to kind of put the application in, but really I'd have to spend a little bit more, blah, blah, blah. Like, what are your tips for maximizing those claims?
Well, it's, as you know, when we had this initial discussion, it's often things that you might not be aware of.
Yes.
Could be claimed. And if you structured it in different ways, it does make it eligible. I think the big one that most people don't realize is sort of going to conferences overseas. You have to be promoting your product or service at those things. So there is a distinction between where you're going on a marketing trip and where you're going for self-educational purposes. Those are typically not eligible, but it's often sitting with people, having a 15-minute phone call with them, getting to understand what their business is all about, and then just saying, have you thought about this? Or if you put it this way, you might be able to claim that. It's giving people just the benefit of the experience that I've had working with, hundreds of clients over the years, to be able to give them ideas on where they can spend their money profitably to get some money in return. As I say, your dollar that you're spending on marketing should return some return by itself. You shouldn't be spending $1 to get 50 cents back.
Right. Yeah.
From the export grant. So, often when you sit down with somebody and you hear what they're doing, and you realize that, if they went and got a high quality video made by somebody outside of the business, spent $10,000-$20,000, as I have in some cases, clients do that on a really good marketing video, that can be claimed for the export grant, for example. Yeah. You don't have to just sit there and try and do everything on an iPhone and put together a video that may not look so good when you're competing in a very competitive market like the US, for example.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. And I mean, there are definitely differentials over in the US to Australia, just naturally. Do you know what I mean? I feel like they are slightly more ahead of the game, So potentially our little iPhones in the back of our office, which does great. I mean, that's what I use all the time. But when you're kind of wanting to go to that next level, you're probably going to have to spend a little bit more to be able to compete with that other market for sure. Now, for those people that are out there, such as myself, when I first met you, I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to pick this guy's brain. And now we've become friends and you're going to do my export grant at the beginning of July. How can people, tap into your knowledge and figure out whether or not the export grant is something that their business is eligible for? Where can they find you? Your website, phone number?
Yes. So probably our website is grant with a t-central.com.au. Probably best to send me an email at Erik, ERIK, at grandcentral.com.au, and just start the conversation with an email. If you give your website, I'll quickly have a look at it, and then we can progress into a phone call and have a quick conversation about that, and then take it from there. Happy to have any discussion with any of your listeners just to see whether they are. I can tell very quickly whether there's going to be anything there for them or not, or give them pointers if they're not quite ready to where they could be spending money to get over the $15,000 initially.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Well, this wasn't a long episode, and I made that on purpose because it is quite, again, mind-blowing for some people, and they're probably still trying to wrap their heads around it. But as Erik said, please, I encourage any business that feels that they, fall even in some of this criteria and aren't 100% sure. I'd rather you be safe than sorry and miss out on copious amounts of money that the government is giving in order for you to grow your business and bring other countries into our business, to support that. So as Erik said, I will For those of you that are listening, my team and I will also be putting together the whole transcription for this episode at angelahenderson.com.au, and we'll make sure to include those links in Erik's email as he discussed. And of course, I cover all sorts of related business and life topics inside of my very active Facebook community. We're over 5,000 now. So head on over and join us at the Australian Business Collaborative on Facebook. And for the rest of you, thank you so much, Erik, for being here today and sharing your wisdom. And I look forward to working with you in July on my own expert grant. And for the rest of you, I hope you have a fabulous day no matter where you are in the world. And I look forward to having you join me for next week's episode of the Business and Life Conversations podcast. Have an awesome day, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson. www.angelahenderson.com.au